Picture this: the vast expanses of Western China, where yaks wander freely and the mountains tell ancient tales. It's like entering a different realm, right? But why is the population so sparse? Perhaps it's because the yaks had first dibs on the nicest places, or it's because Western China is the secret hideout of the mystical pandas, who value their privacy. It's also possible that the natives have mastered the art of camouflage and are engaging in an epic game of hide and seek. Who knows? However, one thing is certain: Western China is a mysterious area. The sparse population of Western China might be linked to several factors. This brings us to today's video, where we'll take a look at the factors leading to fewer people living in the West. China is a large land with various cultures, landscapes, and histories. When we think about China, we frequently see bustling cities such as Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen. But the country exhibits significant disparities in population distribution between its western and eastern regions. Eastern China is densely populated, accounting for the majority of the country's 1.4 billion people. Guangdong, Shandong, Henan, and Jiangsu are key provinces, with more than 95 million people. The eastern region's coasts, lush plains, and major urban areas like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou draw a large population density. However, the western half of China presents a different picture, one of vast open areas, spectacular landscapes, and far fewer people. Key areas like Xinjiang, Tibet, and Qinghai are characterized by sparse populations, often with fewer than 10 people per square kilometer. Xinjiang, the largest of these regions, has a population of about 25 million, considerably lower compared to individual eastern provinces. Looking at the population data, Western China has about 10% of the population inhabiting roughly 57% of the country's land area. Although 10% doesn't sound like a lot, given China's total population of approximately 1.4 billion, this amounts to about 140 million people living in the West. Conversely, Eastern China has about 90% of the population residing in roughly 43% of the land area. This highlights the significant disparity in population density and distribution between Western and Eastern China, with the majority of the population concentrated in the relatively smaller Eastern region. This brings us to several questions. Why do so few people live in Western China? What are they hiding from us, being that it has a greater landmass than the East? The story of Western China's limited population combines many factors. Our first stop is the historical context, potentially the most crucial determinant. To understand why few Chinese dwell in Western China, one must first consider the historical context. The Chinese civilization evolved and prospered in the rich plains of the Yellow and Yangtze rivers in the country's east, which were ideal for agriculture and could support enormous populations. These regions became ancient China's political, economic, and cultural capitals. Over millennia, being the heartlands of Chinese dynasties, they attracted dense populations naturally. Western China, which includes Tibet, Xinjiang, Qinghai, Gansu, and sections of Inner Mongolia, have long been regarded as peripheral to these ancient capitals of Chinese civilization. These regions were frequently on the outskirts of the Chinese Empire and were populated by ethnic minorities such as Uyghurs, Tibetans, Kazakhs, and Mongols. During certain dynasties, like the Tang and Ming, Han Chinese expansion into these regions was typically restricted to military expeditions, trade missions, and the odd resettlement. Another historical factor is the Silk Road, which allowed for some Han Chinese presence in the West, but was mostly used for trade rather than colonization. Even while cities such as Dunhuang in Gansu province grew into prominent outposts, the overall Han presence remained low in comparison to the eastern heartlands. Western China's topography and natural surroundings make large-scale human settlement extremely difficult. Western China is characterized by enormous regions of difficult terrain, including the massive Tibetan Plateau, also known as the roof of the world. This plateau is distinguished by high heights, low oxygen levels and harsh climatic conditions. Most crops struggle to grow due to the tough circumstances. Maintaining a large population in such a location will necessitate substantial adaptation and technological improvements that were not previously available. Western China is also home to some of the world's largest deserts, including the Taklamakan and Gobi deserts. These arid regions pose another substantial impediment to population growth. Deserts have limited water supplies, which are required for agriculture, industry, and basic human survival. Without adequate water, the formation of settlements, let alone thriving cities, is extremely difficult. The climate in these desert regions is harsh, with blistering heat in the summer and bitter cold in the winter, which discourages habitation. The presence of such significant natural barriers has undoubtedly influenced human dispersion in the region. Historically, cultures have migrated towards places where farming and settlement were possible. Eastern China, with its rich plains and temperate climate, provided a dramatic contrast to the West's mountainous topography. Notable river systems such as the Yellow River and Yangtze River provided not just water, but also fertile soil due to periodic floods, facilitating the formation of one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations. Western China's terrain hampered not only agriculture, but also the development of transportation and infrastructure. The hilly regions, which include significant ranges like the Kunlun and Tian Shan mountains, hampered road and railway building. Even today, developing and maintaining infrastructure in such difficult terrain necessitates significant investment and modern technology. Historically, commodities and people were naturally routed down less difficult routes, frequently avoiding Western China entirely. Additionally, geographical constraints exacerbated cultural and economic isolation. The Silk Road, a historic network of commercial routes, passed across Western China, allowing for some connection and trade. These roads frequently ran across the outskirts of the most challenging places, while the core economic hubs remained in more accessible regions. Because of its isolation, Western China did not gain as much from the economic and technological advances that spurred population growth in other parts of the country. Western China has greater ethnic diversity than more homogeneous eastern provinces. The region is home to various ethnic minorities, including Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Kazakhs, each with their own historical and cultural heritage. Cultural dynamics broaden our awareness. Each group possesses its own culture, language, and traditions. The Uyghurs, a Turkic ethnic minority, account for roughly half of the population in Xinjiang. Similarly, the Tibet Autonomous Region is primarily composed of ethnic Tibetans. These communities have traditionally lived in small, dispersed settlements that are frequently self-sufficient and firmly connected to their cultural identities. These people lead diverse lives, with many traditionally involved in nomadic herding and subsistence farming, which do not support dense population clusters. This is because traditional Chinese Han populations historically preferred the more fertile eastern plains for agriculture, yielding generations of concentrated Han populations in the east. Historically, the Chinese government has promoted assimilation policies to integrate ethnic minorities into the broader Chinese cultural sphere. The relationship between these ethnic communities and the Han Chinese majority has also been tense, influencing settlement patterns and government policy aimed at encouraging Han migration to these areas. Living standards and access to public services are also important social considerations. Whilst big eastern cities offer sophisticated healthcare, education, and social services, these facilities are frequently less accessible and of inferior quality in many sections of Western China. People tend to relocate where they believe they can provide the best standard of living for themselves and their children, resulting in a self-sustaining cycle of heavily populated eastern regions and sparsely populated western parts. Environmental and climatic conditions further perpetuate the demographic divide. Eastern China benefits from a more temperate climate with sufficient rainfall to support a variety of agricultural activities. Western China, on the other hand, includes some of the driest and coldest areas in the world. The arid climate is a major environmental element influencing population dispersion in Western China. Much of the region experiences little precipitation and high evaporation rates, resulting in water scarcity and desertification. The Taklamakan Desert, one of the world's largest deserts, covers much of the Xinjiang province, making significant areas of land unsuitable for development. Harsh climatic conditions, such as severe temperatures and frequent sandstorms, further discourage human settlement and agricultural activity. Another big environmental problem in Western China is the risk of seismic activity. The region is located along the Pacific Ring of Fire, making it vulnerable to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. A severe earthquake struck Wenchuan County, Sichuan Province in 2008. This emphasized the region's vulnerability to seismic activity, resulting in widespread destruction and loss of life. The fear of earthquakes, combined with the hilly topography, creates significant obstacles for infrastructure development and urban planning in Western China. Western China is home to various ecosystems and fragile regions that must be carefully protected and managed. Tibetan Plateau, also known as the Third Pole, is home to massive glaciers and fresh water supplies that are critical for providing downstream water to millions of people throughout Asia itself. However, growing urbanization and industrialization endanger these delicate habitats, resulting in environmental deterioration and biodiversity loss. Conservation initiatives are critical to protecting Western China's unique flora and fauna, while also ensuring the region's long-term development. Disparities in industrialization, infrastructure, economic levels, and living circumstances exist between China's eastern and western areas, resulting in a significant demographic imbalance. This video investigates the many aspects of economic development that contribute to the demographic phenomenon, emphasizing the roles of historical backdrop, government policies, work possibilities, and rural-urban movement trends. Historically, China's economic growth has been uneven, with eastern coastline regions benefiting far more than western inland areas. Since Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms in the late 1970s, China has seen tremendous industrialization and modernization. These reforms have mostly affected the eastern provinces, including Guangdong, Jiangsu, and Zhejiang. Coastal regions were the first to open up to international trade and economic zones, attracting foreign investment and establishing commercial and manufacturing hubs. In contrast, the western provinces, including Tibet, Xinjiang, Qinghai, and Gansu, remain largely remote and underdeveloped. The Chinese government has noticed the imbalance and implemented many measures to stimulate economic development in western regions. Most notably, the Western Development Policy, which was started in 2000. This program sought to attract investment, enhance infrastructure, and promote sustainable development. Despite these efforts, the economic divide remains significant due to a number of inherent problems. The western regions are distinguished by harsh weather and rugged terrain, as described previously in the video. Infrastructure development is another important issue. Eastern locations have a natural advantage in trade and commerce, due to their proximity to ports, rivers, and a more developed transportation network. In contrast, western regions have less connectivity, with fewer roadways, railways, and airports. The lack of comprehensive infrastructure has stifled economic growth and made these locations less appealing to both businesses and residents. For those looking for better career prospects, higher income, and higher living standards, the eastern regions provide significantly more advantages. Income disparities worsen the population distribution. According to reports, residents in Western China earn much less than their eastern counterparts. Economic opportunities in the West are restricted, with fewer businesses and services available to create jobs. As a result, many people from the western regions move to more rich eastern cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen in quest of better work opportunities and higher incomes. The rural-urban migration has contributed to the depopulation of western regions and the overpopulation of eastern cities.